The Galactic Concordat had existed for 12,000 years. Every civilized species in the galaxy belonged to it. The Concordat had laws for everything. Millions and millions of laws. Most species thought the laws were sacred, handed down by wise ancestors who knew best. The Quickstar studied law their entire lives. They had 3 brains dedicated to remembering every rule. The Valorum had never broken a single law in 7,000 years. They were proud of this fact. Other species tried to follow their example. When humans applied to join the Concordat, nobody worried. Humans were just another species. They seemed polite enough. They wore strange clothes they called suits. They smiled a lot. The Concordat had accepted 700 species before. One more would be easy. Arbitrator Telvesh handled the human application. She was Quickstar, naturally. Her people ran most of the legal system. She had processed applications for 50 years without trouble. Humans would be no different. Have you read all the laws? Telvesh asked the human ambassador. The woman's name was Chun. She nodded and smiled that strange human smile. Yes, all 847 million articles. Very impressive work. Telvesh felt pleased. Humans understood the importance of law. Then you know that conquest is forbidden. Military expansion is forbidden. You cannot take over other species' territory or economies. We understand completely, Chun said. We would never break those laws. Telvesh approved the application. Humans became members of the Concordat. She thought that was the end of it. She was very wrong. 3 months later, Telvesh received a complaint. A Valorum merchant company was angry. Humans were stealing their business. Telvesh investigated immediately. Theft was illegal under Article 2.3 million. But when she looked at what the humans had done, she found nothing illegal. The humans had simply started selling the same products as the Valorum. The human products were better. They cost less. Customers preferred them. This is theft. The Valorum merchant insisted. No, Telvesh said slowly, checking the law again. Theft is taking property without permission. The humans took nothing. They just sold better products. But they're destroying our business. Telvesh searched through the laws. Competition was not illegal. Nobody had ever thought to make it illegal. For 12,000 years, species had stayed in their lanes. They made what they had always made. They sold to who they had always sold to. Everyone was comfortable. Humans were not comfortable with comfort. More complaints came. Humans were opening businesses everywhere. They hired alien workers and paid them fairly, but somehow still made huge profits. They studied each species' culture and used that knowledge to make products those species wanted. They were polite. They were legal. They were impossible to stop. Telvesh started keeping a special file. She called it the human problem. Every day, it grew larger. Humans discovered something interesting about Concordat law. The laws were very specific about what you could not do. They said nothing about what you could do. For 12,000 years, that had been fine. Most species did not push boundaries. Most species respected the spirit of the law. Humans respected the letter of the law. That was very different. A human corporation called Stellar Solutions found an old law about cultural exchange. Article 12.3 million said species should share knowledge and traditions. It encouraged visits and learning. The law was meant to promote friendship. Humans used it to gather business intelligence. They sent thousands of cultural ambassadors to alien worlds. These ambassadors asked questions about everything. What did locals like? What did they need? What did they wish existed? The ambassadors smiled and took notes and reported back. 6 months later, human businesses sold exactly what each world wanted. It was not illegal. It was just smart. Telvesh began to study humans more carefully. She accessed their history files. What she found disturbed her. Humans came from a world called Earth. Earth had hundreds of different governments. These governments had different laws. Humans spent thousands of years arguing about laws, changing laws, and finding ways around laws. They invented something called lawyers. These were people trained to find holes in laws. Before humans had spaceships, they had lawyers. Before they had computers, they had lawyers. Humans saw laws as puzzles to solve. Most species saw laws as wisdom from the past. Humans saw them as challenges. The crisis grew worse. Human companies made deals with struggling colonies. The deals were fair according to the law. But somehow, after each deal, the colony needed human help more than before. Not because humans cheated. Because humans were good at making themselves necessary. They sold medicine at good prices. Then the colony realized human medicine worked better than what they had before. They sold communication systems. The systems were excellent. Soon the colony could not imagine going back to old systems. Within a year, 400 colonies depended on human businesses. Not because of force, because of choice. But the choice was between accepting human help or falling behind. Everyone else who already had. Commander Dex of the Crater Warrior species was furious. This is conquest. He roared at Telvesh. They are taking over the galaxy. But they have broken no laws, Telvesh said. She felt tired. Her secondary brain hurt from trying to find something, anything, the humans had done wrong. They are breaking the spirit of the law. Telvesh searched the legal database. The phrase spirit of the law appeared nowhere in the Concordat codes. There was no law requiring species to follow the spirit of anything. The real shock came when humans proposed something called the Friendship Fleet Initiative. They offered to send ships to protect systems that requested help. The offer was legal under Article 890,000 about mutual defense, but the human ships were enormous. They carried no weapons, which kept them legal. Instead, they carried factories, materials, and thousands of human workers. The ships arrived as helpers. They stayed as the foundation of entire economies. You said the ships must be unarmed, Chun explained when Telvesh protested. Article 890,000 does not mention ship size. It does not limit crew numbers. It does not restrict cargo. The law meant small patrol ships. Telvesh said, then the law should have specified that. Chum's smile was polite and infuriating. We are happy to follow what the law says, but we cannot follow what the law meant to say. Telvesh understood the true horror then. Humans were not breaking the Concordat. They were exposing that the Concordat had never needed to be unbreakable before. The laws had gaps everywhere. Huge gaps. Gaps you could fly a friendship fleet through. For 12,000 years, species had followed the obvious meaning of laws. Nobody had thought to follow only the literal meaning. Nobody had looked for loopholes. Humans had looked. Humans had found them. And humans were winning a war nobody else knew they were fighting. Telvesh called for an emergency council meeting. For the first time in 3,000 years, every species in the Concordat gathered to discuss a crisis. The crisis was humanity. And the crisis was legal. The Concordat Council chamber was enormous. It had to be. 200 different species needed to fit inside, and some species were very large. The chamber floated in space, neutral territory belonging to no one. Delegates arrived in ships of every shape and size. This was the first emergency session in 3,000 years. The last one had been about the Krig's plague that killed millions. Before that, a supernova that destroyed 4 systems. The Concordat only met like this for disasters. Most delegates considered humanity a disaster. Ambassador Chun sat in the center of the chamber. Humans had been given a small delegation area because they were new members. Chun sat alone in a simple chair, surrounded by species much older and more powerful. She did not look worried, but she looked interested. Commander Dex spoke first. He was Crater, a warrior species with 4 arms and a booming voice. Humans are destroying the Concordat. They twist our laws. They corrupt our ways. They must be stopped. Other delegates made sounds of agreement. Clicks, whistles, and rumbles filled the chamber. Chun stood. She held a small datapad. Article 2.1 million, subsection 47. All law shall be interpreted by exact wording. Precedent is the guide for interpretation. She looked at Dex. The law says nothing about the spirit of laws. Only the letter. Everyone knows what the laws mean. Dex roared. Then everyone should have written what they meant, Chun replied calmly. Elder Civ of the Valorum spoke next. She was ancient, even for her long-lived species. Her voice was cold and precise. For 7,000 years, no species needed such explanations. We operated on mutual understanding. Mutual understanding is lovely, Chun said. But Article 15, subsection 9832, states that only written law is binding. We cannot be punished for violating understandings that were never written down. Telvesh watched from her arbitrator's seat. She had studied human history extensively over the past year. She understood what the other delegates did not. Humans came from a world that had been divided for most of its history. Hundreds of nations, each with different laws. Humans spent millennia in legal competition. They developed professions dedicated to finding holes in laws. They wrote complex contracts to protect themselves from other complex contracts. They argued over every word and every rule. Legal thinking was built into their culture. Most species saw laws as guidance from wise ancestors. Humans saw laws as tools that could be used or misused depending on skill. Let us discuss the economic situation, Telvesh said, taking control of the meeting. She displayed data on the central screen. Humans have established business relationships in 400 systems. They control significant portions of medicine distribution, food production, transportation, and communications. Murmurs of alarm rippled through the chamber. However, Telvesh continued. Every single contract was voluntary. Every agreement followed concordant commercial law. Article 18 million prohibits economic coercion. I have found no evidence of coercion. Just because something is legal does not make it right. A Pix delegate shouted. Actually, Chun said, in a society based on rule of law, legal and right are meant to be the same thing. If they are not, perhaps the laws need improvement. Elder Civ accessed her data terminal. Her face changed color, a sign of distress in Valorum physiology. They are in our supply chains. All of them. Humans provide components for our medical equipment. They transport our food shipments. They maintain our communication networks. She looked around the chamber. Humanity has made itself vital to Concordat function in less than 2 years. If we expelled them tomorrow, our economy would collapse. Silence fell. This was the truth nobody wanted to face. Humans had not conquered with weapons. They had conquered with convenience. They had made themselves irreplaceable. Then we forced them out. Dex stood, his combat implants glowing. We expel them from the Concordat. We remove them by force if necessary. Chun consulted her datapad. Article 127, subsection 3. Expulsion requires proof of law violation, a trial by jury of peer species, and exhaustion of all diplomatic remedies. We will contest every stage of this process. Legal experts estimate 40 to 60 years before expulsion could be completed. She looked up. Also, Article 127, subsection 8 states expelled species retain all contracts executed before expulsion. You could remove our political membership while remaining economically dependent on us. That seems unwise. Vex sat down. He looked defeated. A Quickstar elder spoke. Surely we can pass new laws. Update the legal framework to address these tactics. Excellent idea, Chun said. We welcome new legislation. In fact, we have studied your legislative process thoroughly. Articles 67,000 through 67,450 cover this. You need unanimous consent from all member species. A minimum 10-year review period. Passage through 4 separate committees. We will participate in good faith throughout. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages. The translation systems struggled to keep up. Everyone understood what Chun was saying. The very system meant to control humanity was too slow and complicated to stop them. Telvesh had known this moment would come. She had tried to warn the council privately. The Concordat's legal system was designed for consensus among species who already agreed on most things. It was never meant to handle a species that saw laws as flexible tools. What do you want? Telvesh asked loudly. Her voice cut through the chaos. You have demonstrated that you can legally dismantle the Concordat. What is your goal? The chamber quieted. Everyone wanted to hear this answer. Chun's expression became serious. For the first time, she was not smiling. We do not want to dismantle anything, arbitrator. We want fairness. She looked around the chamber. Your laws were written by species who already had power. They were designed to maintain existing power structures. You call it peace and stability. We call it stagnation and control. She gestured at the assembled delegates. The Valorum have been the dominant economic power for 7,000 years. The Quickstar have controlled the legal system for just as long. The Crater have military privileges no younger species can access. You wrote laws that keep yourselves on top and call it justice. That is not true. Elder Civ protested. Article 45.6 million restricts antimatter production to species with 10,000 years of spacefaring history. Chun said. Only 8 species qualify. Article 233.8 million requires council approval for new colonies, and the council is controlled by the oldest species. Article 890.2 million gives military response authority only to species with Class 5 fleets, which only 12 species have. She looked at each delegate in turn. Your laws are not neutral. They favor the old and powerful. They make it nearly impossible for new species to rise. You have created a galaxy frozen in place, where the same species rule forever. Murmurs spread through the chamber. Younger species, admitted to the Concordat in the last few thousand years, looked thoughtful. They had never articulated this feeling, but they recognized it. Humanity is not interested in conquest, Chun said. We are interested in opportunity. We have shown that your system has flaws because it was never designed to accommodate species with new ideas. We found your loopholes because you never expected anyone to look for them. She paused. So here is our proposal. Restructure the Concordat to allow real competition and innovation. Give newer species actual influence, not ceremonial votes. Update your laws to address modern reality. Create a system that works for everyone, not just the ancient powers. And if we refuse? Chun smiled again. That unsettling human smile. Then we continue doing things the hard way, legally. The council would debate for weeks. But Telvesh knew the truth. Humanity had already won. They had read the instruction manual and found it lacking. Now the galaxy would have to write a better one. 5 years passed. Telvesh barely recognized the galaxy she had spent her life protecting. The Concordat. Council met every month now instead of every century. The legislative chamber buzzed with constant activity. Debates happened daily. Species argued, compromised, and voted on new laws regularly. Some delegates found it exhausting. Others found it exhilarating. 300 new articles had been added to Concordat law. 3,000 old articles had been revised. The changes addressed competition, economic practices, and fair opportunity for newer species. The laws had teeth now. Real definitions. Clear language that was hard to misinterpret. Humans had helped write most of them. Ambassador Chun now served as deputy arbitrator for economic affairs. She worked in an office down the hall from Telvesh. This still surprised Telvesh sometimes. 5 years ago, she had seen humans as invaders. Now they were colleagues. Article 847.4 million, Telvesh said, reviewing documents with Chun. Market capture limitations in developing systems. You wrote this law. It is extremely strict. Of course, Chun replied. We did not want loopholes. We wanted rules that actually work. The transition had been painful. The creator had tried to copy human tactics. They thought if humans could exploit laws, so could they. But they learned that finding loopholes required a specific type of thinking. You needed to see rules as puzzles. You needed to question everything. The creator were warriors, not lawyers. They were terrible at it. The Valorum suffered most. 7,000 years of economic dominance ended in less than a decade. Their old business practices could not compete with human innovation. Their companies either adapted or died. Many died. The Valorum Elder Council split into factions. Some wanted to embrace change. Others wanted to retreat to their home systems and ignore the new galaxy. But something unexpected happened. Younger species started speaking up. The Picts had been Concordat members for only a century before humans arrived. They had always been quiet in council meetings. Nobody listened to them anyway. But after watching humanity's success, the Picts hired human legal consultants. Together, they analyzed a 5,000-year-old trade law. The law restricted antimatter fuel sales to established spacefaring powers. The Picts could not buy antimatter. They had to use slower, less efficient fuel. This kept them economically weak. The law seemed permanent and unchangeable, but the Picts and their human advisors found that the law never defined established. How many years of spacefaring made you established? The law did not say. The Picts argued they were established. They had been spacefaring for 2,000 years. The council refused to agree. So the Picts took the case to arbitration. They cited precedent and definitions from other articles. They argued for months. They won. Now the Picts had access to antimatter fuel. Their economy was growing. Other young species noticed. The Torvin did something similar with voting rights. Old Concordat law said only homeworld populations could vote in system governance. Colony worlds had no representation. The Torvin had dozens of colonies with billions of residents who could not vote. Humans helped them. Find Article 12,000. Subsection 99. It defines citizens as permanent residents of Concordat member systems, not homeworlds. Systems. The difference was small but important. The Torvin argued their colonists were permanent residents. Therefore, they were citizens. Therefore, they could vote. The old powers fought this hard. They claimed it violated tradition. But tradition was not written in the law. The Torvin won their case. Telvesh watched these changes with mixed feelings. Part of her mourned the old Concordat. It had been stable and predictable. She had understood her role. Now everything was complicated and messy. But another part of her felt something she had not expected. She felt excited. I studied Earth's history extensively. Telvesh told Chun during a quiet moment. You had something called lawyers. Professional legal experts. Still do, Chun confirmed. Most humans find them annoying until they need one. The Concordat is establishing law schools now. teaching adversarial legal thinking. Many species find this disturbing. Chun nodded. They will adapt. Law should be challenged and tested. That is not disrespect. It is the highest form of respect. It means you take the law seriously enough to hold it accountable. The Friendship Fleet Initiative had transformed completely. At first, it was clearly a human power grab disguised as aid. But under new regulations, it became something better. A genuinely cooperative defense force with strict oversight and rotating command. Ships from 20 different species now served in the Friendship Fleet. They protected trade routes and responded to emergencies. Command rotated every 2 years. No single species could dominate. Humans had voluntarily accepted these restrictions. They helped write them. This surprised everyone. Why would humans limit their own power? Because we never wanted power for its own sake, Chun explained when asked. We wanted a fair system. Once we got that, we did not need special advantages. Telvesh thought about this often. Humans had spent 2 years exploiting every loophole they could find. They had shown the Concordat's weaknesses ruthlessly. But once the laws changed, they stopped. They followed the new rules as carefully as they had exploited the old ones. It was almost as if humans actually believed in rule of law. They just wanted the law to be better. Commander Dex approached Chun at a diplomatic reception. Telvesh watched nervously. 5 years ago, Dex had wanted to throw humans out of the Concordat by force. He had called them destroyers and parasites. I hated you, Dex said bluntly. He held a drink in one of his 4 hands. I thought you were killing everything good about the Concordat. Chun waited. But you taught us something important, Dex continued. Peace through stagnation is not real peace. It is just control by another name. My species was young once. 3,000 years ago. We had new ideas. The old powers dismissed us. Told us to be patient. To wait our turn. To respect tradition. He drank deeply. We waited. We respected. And we became like them. Comfortable. Stagnant. We forgot what it felt like to push boundaries. You reminded us. Chun smiled. You are welcome. Though I suspect you did not enjoy the reminder. No, Dex admitted. It was terrible. But necessary. Not everyone was happy. The Valorum Elder Council had fractured. 3 elders refused to accept the new Concordat. They took their followers and withdrew to their core systems. They sealed their borders and stopped participating in council votes. Their colonies stayed. The young Valorum did not want to return to the old ways. This created a split in their species that might never heal. Other ancient species struggled similarly. Some adapted. Some retreated. The galaxy was becoming divided between those who embraced change and those who rejected it. But even the resistors could not stop the momentum. Too many species had tasted opportunity. Too many had learned to question the old certainties. The Concordat would never be frozen again. Telvesh had written 17 books about human legal philosophy. She had become the galaxy's foremost expert on what she called adversarial cooperation. This was the human tendency to compete fiercely while somehow making everyone stronger through competition. It should not work. Competition should create winners and losers. But humans had shown that competition could create better products, better services, and better ideas. Everyone could benefit if the competition was fair. Your species frightened us, Telvesh admitted to Chun. You still do sometimes. You see every system as a puzzle to solve. Every rule is something to test. It is unsettling. It is also why we never stagnate, Chun replied. And now that we have taught the Concordat to think critically, neither will you. You are welcome. Telvesh laughed. Her species rarely laughed. The sound surprised her. Was that your plan all along? To revolutionize us? Our plan was to not be controlled by rules we had no voice in creating, Chun said. The revolution was a bonus. She paused. Though I admit, we knew what would happen. You cannot teach people to find loopholes without teaching them to question everything. Once you start questioning, it is hard to stop. That was the real change. Not the new laws or the economic shifts. The real change was in how species thought about authority. The Concordat had been built on respect for ancient wisdom. That wisdom was never questioned. It was simply obeyed. Humans questioned everything. And they taught others to do the same. 10 years after humanity joined the Concordat, Telvesh attended a ceremony she never expected to see. The Concordat was inaugurating its first elected council. For 12,000 years, council seats had been permanent. Species earned them through age and influence. Once you had a seat, you kept it forever. The same 20 species had controlled the council since its founding. Now there would be elections. Every 100 years, species would vote for council representatives. Younger species could earn seats through popular support rather than ancient privilege. The old permanent members kept advisory roles, but they could no longer make decisions alone. This change had taken 8 years of debate. Every article had been argued over. Every word had been scrutinized. The final vote was close, but it passed. Humans had not written this law. The Picts had proposed it. The Torvan had developed it. 30 different species had contributed, but everyone knew humans had made it possible. They had shown the galaxy that change was possible. Telvesh sat in the observation area. Ambassador Chun sat beside her. They watched as the new council members took their positions. Some were from ancient species. Some were from young species that had never held power before. How does it feel? Telvesh asked. To have changed the galaxy? Chun considered this. Strange. We just wanted fairness for ourselves. We did not mean to start a revolution, but you did. Yes, we did. Chun smiled. Though I think the revolution was already waiting to happen. We just provided the spark. Telvesh thought about her own species. The Quickstar had controlled the legal system for thousands of years. It had been their purpose, their pride. Now they shared that control with dozens of species. Some Quickstar elders considered this a tragedy, a loss of their special status. But Telvesh had come to see it differently. Sharing control meant sharing responsibility. It meant the law belonged to everyone, not just the oldest species. That was better. That was fair. She had been trained to maintain the system. Now she helped people change it. This felt more meaningful than anything she had done before. I read one of your Earth philosophers, Telvesh said. Someone named Jefferson. He said that every generation should be able to change the laws that govern them. That the dead should not rule the living. You have been doing your homework, Chun said, impressed. It made me uncomfortable at first. Our way is to respect the wisdom of ancestors. But then I realized something. My ancestors were not wiser than me. They just lived in a different time. They made laws for their galaxy, not for mine. Telvesh looked at Chun. Humans understand that time changes things. You build your societies expecting change. Most species build expecting permanence. We thought our way was more stable. But permanence is not stability. It is just slow death. The ceremony continued. New council members gave speeches. They talked about hope and opportunity. They promised to represent all voices, not just the powerful. Some would keep those promises. Some would not. That was democracy. The Concordat had established its first independent judiciary. Judges who were not beholden to any species government. They would interpret laws fairly. They could overrule council decisions if those decisions violated fundamental rights. Fundamental rights. That was another human concept. The Concordat had always had laws, but it had never defined what rights citizens possessed. What could governments not take away, no matter what laws they passed? A committee spent 3 years defining these rights. The right to trade freely, the right to be treated fairly under law, the right to move between systems, the right to participate in governance. 43 fundamental rights in total. These rights could not be voted away. Even the Council could not remove them. They were permanent, written into the Concordat's founding documents. Ironically, humans had pushed hardest to make some things unchangeable. They wanted certain principles locked in place. Telvesh found this amusing. Humans fought to change everything, except the principles that protected change itself. "We are not anarchists," Chen explained when Telvesh mentioned this. "We believe in rules. We just believe rules should serve people, not control them. Some principles are worth protecting permanently. Freedom, fairness, opportunity. These should not be up for a vote." The galaxy's economy had transformed completely. Human corporations were still powerful, but they no longer dominated like they had 5 years ago. Other species had learned human business methods. They competed effectively now. A Valorum company called Ancient Harmonies had adapted beautifully. They combined their 7,000 years of quality reputation with new human-style marketing. They were thriving. Other Valorum companies studied their example. The Crater started something called Warrior Solutions. They provided security services with absolutely no corruption or dishonesty. Their reputation became unbeatable. Humans were better at business tricks, but Crater honor was worth something in the market. Species were learning that humans were not special. They were just different. Their advantages could be learned. Their tactics could be copied. The galaxy was becoming more competitive, but that meant everyone had to improve. Products got better. Services got better. Prices fell. Customers benefited. Some businesses failed. That had never happened before in the Concordat's orderly economy. Failure was disturbing the species that valued stability. But Telvesh noticed something. New businesses opened to replace failed ones. Often they were better. Failure created space for improvement. "The galaxy is more chaotic now," Telvesh observed. "Some people hate that." "Chaos is just change that makes you uncomfortable," Chung replied. "Order is just stagnation that feels familiar. Neither is inherently good or bad. The question is whether the system serves people or just perpetuates itself." The Concordat had expanded its legal system dramatically. The old system had 847 million articles, but most were ancient precedents that nobody used. The new system had only 400 million articles, but they were clear and relevant. Old contradictory laws had been removed. Ambiguous language had been clarified. Human lawyers had helped with this. So had Quickstar legal experts, Valorum judges, and representatives from 100 other species. They worked together. They argued fiercely, but they respected each other. That was new too. Telvesh had trained 30 new arbitrators in the past 5 years. She taught them traditional Quickstar legal reasoning. Then she taught them human adversarial thinking. Both were necessary now. You needed to understand what laws meant and what they could be made to mean. Her students found this difficult. Holding two opposite ideas in your head at once was hard, but it was necessary. Law was no longer simple. It had never been simple. They had just pretended it was. The ceremony ended. The new council members dispersed to their offices. They would start work tomorrow on hundreds of pending proposals. The legislature never stopped now. Some species missed the old quiet days when nothing changed. But those days were gone forever. Chun stood to leave. Telvesh stood with her. "What will you do now?" Telvesh asked. Humanity has achieved everything you wanted. Fair laws, real opportunity, equal voice. Now we compete, Chun said simply. We see if we can succeed under fair rules as well as we succeeded under broken ones. And if you cannot? Chun shrugged. Then we adapt. That is what humans do. We change when we must. We think that is what every species should do. They walked together through the council building. It had been expanded twice in 10 years. More species meant more representatives, meant more space needed. The building would probably expand again soon. There is something I never told you, Telvesh said. 5 years ago, when you proposed restructuring the Concordat, I wanted to refuse. I wanted to expel you by force, laws or no laws. I almost supported it. Chun nodded. I know. I could see it in your face. Why did you not mention it? Because you chose correctly in the end. That is what matters. Not what you wanted to do, but what you actually did. Telvesh felt grateful for that. She had been so close to destroying everything. So close to breaking the very laws she had sworn to uphold. Fear had almost won, but reason had prevailed. Barely. Do you think we will survive this? Telvesh asked. The Concordat, I mean. We have changed so much. Some species have left. Others barely participate. We are more divided now than ever before. Chun stopped walking. She looked at Telvesh seriously. The old Concordat would not have survived much longer anyway. Stagnant systems eventually collapse. They cannot adapt to new challenges. You would have faced a crisis eventually. We just forced it to happen sooner. That does not answer my question. You will survive, Chun said. Not because you are strong, because you are finally learning to change. That is the only thing that matters in the long run. Not strength, not stability, adaptability. They reached the building's exit. Outside, ships from 100 different species came and went from the council station. The traffic was intense. The station had to expand its docking facilities 3 times to handle all the activity. This was the new Concordat. Busy, chaotic, constantly changing. Not perfect, but alive. Telvesh looked at the busy space lanes. The galaxy had laws, she said quietly. Humans had loopholes. Chun smiled. And now the galaxy has better laws. And everyone has learned to read the fine print. That was humanity's real gift to the Concordat. Not business tactics or legal tricks. The understanding that laws were tools created by imperfect beings for practical purposes. They could be questioned. They could be improved. They should serve justice, not replace it. 12,000 years of certainty had ended. Humans had killed it deliberately, with malice aforethought and careful planning. They had murdered the old order and stood trial under its own laws. And the laws had found them innocent, because everything they did was legal. That was the joke. That was the lesson. The Concordat had built an elaborate legal system to maintain peace and order. They had made it so comprehensive that nothing could challenge it. But they forgot that legal and just were not always the same thing. Humans reminded them, painfully, thoroughly, without mercy. And then they helped build something better. Telvesh watched Ambassador Chun board her shuttle. The human turned and waved before entering. Telvesh waved back. 5 years ago, she would not have believed this moment possible. She had hated humans, feared them, wanted them gone. Now she considered Chun a friend. The galaxy would never be the same. The age of unchanging law was over. The age of constant evolution had begun. Some species would thrive in this new era. Others would struggle. Many would fail, but they would all have a chance. That was what humans had fought for. Not to win themselves, but to ensure everyone could compete fairly. Telvesh returned to her office. She had 17 cases to review before tomorrow. New businesses challenging old regulations. Young species demanding representation. Colonial worlds seeking independence. The work never ended anymore. She sat at her desk and smiled. For the first time in 50 years, she felt like her work mattered. Not maintaining the past, but building the future. The galaxy had laws. Humans had found the loopholes. Now everyone was learning to write better laws. That was progress. Messy, uncomfortable, necessary progress. Telvesh opened the first case file and began to read. Outside her window, the galaxy turned, changing, growing, evolving, finally alive.